Here's an expanded version of your script, enhanced with more detail and depth while adhering to YouTube policies. Gareth settled in, bracing for what he expected to be a long stretch of tedious waiting. However, he knew that it could easily morph into something far more dangerous and terrifying. Given the choice, he'd much prefer a boring wait under the warm sun. In moments like these, he usually wished he had a good book to dive into, but instead, he found himself watching the last bits of daylight slip away beyond the horizon. The landscape around him was dominated by towering pine trees, which struck him as peculiar. To Gareth, they were unlike any plants he had ever encountered before. The islands of Walia, where he hailed from, had a sparse and unique flora. The vegetation there was generally smaller, with broad, heavy leaves that soaked up the sunlight. In contrast, these pine trees had an alien spikiness, their needles stretching out like sharp fingers daring anyone to come closer. As he gazed around, his eyes roamed from the trees to the ground and finally to the flickering fire before him. The warmth of the flames was a comforting presence in the encroaching darkness, but it also seemed to amplify his unease. He instinctively pulled his legs closer to his chest, scooting a little nearer to Pen, who was curled up on the ground beside him. Soon, the only source of light was the crackling fire, and it seemed as though the universe was responding to Gareth's thoughts of boredom. The sounds of the forest began to stir, filling the air with a vibrant chorus of life. Chirping and cooing emerged from the branches above, while the faint chittering echoed from deeper within the trees, too far into the shadows for Gareth to see what was making the sounds. The buzzing of insects started as a faint whisper, growing into a constant, enveloping hum that surrounded him. No matter how hard he strained his eyes, clarity remained elusive. Within minutes, the sounds had multiplied, becoming nearly cacophonous. The only moments of silence came when a sharp wind rustled the trees, stealing the noise for just a few seconds at a time. Pen? Gareth ventured, hoping for a response. There was silence, followed by a soft snore. Pen, he called again, a bit louder this time. Came the sleepy reply. There are a lot of things around us. Many different sounds. Are they good? Sound is good. Let me know if everything goes quiet. That's bad, Pen mumbled before slipping back into sleep. All right. Will do, Gareth replied, unsure if she had truly heard him. His eyes darted nervously around the area. Sound was good, silence was bad. The reasoning didn't fully make sense to him, but he decided to trust Pen's experience. Although it didn't calm his nerves much, her presence offered him a small measure of comfort. If she could manage to sleep peacefully, maybe they were safe after all. He glanced over at Pen, whose barrel-like chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm. He thought of her scars, tracing a line of worry to her leg. She lay on her side, and he couldn't see the scar on her left arm. but the mottled pattern on her leg was unsettlingly reminiscent of the way heat would blister his shell. Unable to look too long, he quickly shifted his focus back to the surrounding darkness. To distract himself, Gareth began to mentally catalog the various bird calls he heard, trying to identify each one. This task occupied him for what felt like hours. The only significant event during this time was a sudden scare when an owl swooped down from its perch, its large, forward-facing eyes glowing in the firelight before it glided away into the depths of the forest. As another hour passed, Gareth's heart sank at the sight of something he truly dreaded. Though Pen hadn't moved much while she slept, she suddenly began to shudder. Her shoulders jolted, her stomach clenched, and her breathing turned erratic, losing the steady rhythm it had held. "Mate," she murmured, lost in whatever dream had taken hold of her. "Pen?" Gareth asked, concern flooding his voice. He hesitated, contemplating whether he should move closer. But the memory of Deed's advice from one of their early nights aboard the Nebula held him in place, making him second-guess his instincts. "Mate." It was as if she were trying to scream, but couldn't muster the energy to do so. A part of him wanted to wake her. If he could pull her out of whatever nightmare she was experiencing, wouldn't it be worth the risk? As that thought crossed his mind, he began to inch toward her, but suddenly she thrashed about, rolling herself onto her back. Gareth felt completely lost. Would waking her help? Would it be safe? What if she lashed out in panic? Questions spun in his mind like a whirlwind. He noticed that she had gone eerily still, the makeshift pillow slipping from under her head, causing her dirty blonde hair to collect dirt and debris. Now on his knees, Gareth remained frozen, watching her closely. After a moment of tense stillness, a violent jolt ran through Pen, and her eyes shot open wide. They locked onto Gareth with a furious gaze, the fear and confusion in her eyes overwhelming. For a fleeting moment, she looked like a wild animal caught in a trap. But just as quickly, reality washed over her, and the terror melted away into recognition. They shared a long, intense gaze, Gareth too stunned to speak. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what to say or do. Pen quickly turned away, heat rushing to her face as she fidgeted with her makeshift pillow and laid back down. "A few more hours and we'll head out," she said, her back turned to him once again. Gareth needed a moment to process her words. "But it'll still be dark." "That's fine." "Pen, he hesitated again, struggling to find the right words. His thoughts raced, but he felt a lump in his throat. He waited, hoping she would pick up the conversation, but all he received was silence. Seconds turned into minutes, the weight of the quiet stretching between them. Eventually, he gave in and returned to listening to the sounds of the forest, his thoughts consumed by Pen's earlier outburst. He noted how, at her sudden wake, the surrounding forest had fallen eerily quiet for just a moment. As a few more hours ticked by, Gareth noticed Pen stirring again. She coughed softly to clear her throat and sat up, stretching until a few pops echoed from her back. "You good to get going?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder at him. Sure, but it's still dark." "You could sleep a little longer if you need to." "I'm fine," she insisted, brushing off his concern. He considered asking how she felt after her unsettling episode, but thought better of it. Instead, he observed her as she shook out her clothes and donned them quickly. She chose to tie her heavier shirt around her waist instead of wearing it. Then she crouched down to grab the helmet full of water they had boiled earlier. "You need," she began, but he raised his hand to stop her. "Not a lot." "So, please go ahead." "Thanks," she said, lifting the rim of the helmet to her mouth and tipping it back. She drank deeply, letting out a heavy, satisfied sigh. "Ah, good stuff." She hooked a warped piece of the helmet onto the hanging sleeve of her shirt and tied it off, securing the helmet in place. "Ray," she started, but paused to kick dirt over the last smoldering bits of the fire until it was completely extinguished. "Ready. And don't worry, I'm not going to make you run for 10 minutes before picking you up this time. Hop on." She knelt down, and Gareth climbed onto her back. With her shirt tied around her waist, he could brace his webbed feet against the rolled-up fabric, easing the roughness of the ride as they navigated increasingly rocky terrain. After a short distance, Gareth gathered the courage to broach the subject of the previous night. Pen, about last night." I don't want to bring it up if you don't want to. I just want to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," she replied curtly, her tone sharper than before. Gareth noticed the edge in her voice and felt a pang of disappointment. "But thank you for everything." "If you want to talk," she began, but was cut off as she dropped down from a ledge, causing him to grip tightly to avoid falling off her back. The rest of the sentence faded away, and they fell into silence again. Gareth didn't notice the same cold shoulder she had given before when they discussed sensitive topics. Instead, it was just the rhythm of her movements and the sound of their surroundings. They unknowingly kept close to the river, which meandered near them at times and then receded. Generally, it felt like they were heading toward its source, guided by the sound of rushing water in the distance. Their journey led them to the edge of a shallow chasm that split the forest. Pen halted abruptly, glancing in both directions as if weighing her options. Gareth felt his heart race. They could take the long detour, which would add hours to their journey, or they could attempt the climb down and back up the other side. Pen turned back to him, a look of concern crossing her face. "What are you thinking?" she asked, assessing the gap ahead. "I think it'll be faster to climb down and back up the other side," he suggested, trying to sound confident. "That sounds like a terrible idea," she replied, raising an eyebrow. "You think all my ideas are terrible." "That's because they usually are." She smirked, the corner of her mouth quirking up in a way that suggested she was both teasing and partially serious. Gareth couldn't help but notice her expression, feeling his own spirits lift at her playful demeanor. "I'm starting to think you enjoy terrorizing me," he remarked, the hint of a smile creeping onto his face. "A little," she admitted, a glint of mischief sparkling in her eyes. "That's sick, Pen," he huffed, rolling his eyes but unable to hide his amusement. Pen chuckled, her laughter cutting through the tension that had settled between them. It was a light sound, refreshing in the dim light of the fading day, and it made Gareth feel more at ease. He allowed himself to relax for a moment, cherishing the warmth of their camaraderie amidst the uncertainty of their surroundings.